Hey YouTube, Hive Radical here. I know I've got, I still have in the planning stages, for those of you following the whole trunk and branch dialogue. I'm still working on that. That's taking me a bit longer time to compile in the way I wish to. This week's been a little crazy for myself. A lot's been going on in my life personally. But responding to Shazoolo on a wide array of points that have been made in several of his videos is actually something that doesn't take me too much preparation here, so I'm going to address some of these things. And again, this is covering several of Shazoolo's recent videos, his responses, part 1 more on Gethsemane and Christ's Atonement in Mormonism, and also his more recent response to Jarko, and ever surprised with regards to praying for a confirmation as to the truth of things. So I'm just going to it might seem like I'm jumping around, because in some points there is a bit of jumping around, but I want to be as comprehensive in covering the things he's brought up as I can be. So I'm going to start off here. First of all, it's a little interesting. There was a side point that I brought up in my most recent, I believe it's my most recent response to Shazoolo, which he responded to, and I brought up Romans 10:9, where it talks about confessing Christ, and it's interesting because in the most recent response that Shaz did to Jarko, he takes something and he takes the Greek and he differentiates stuff, and he gets into kind of the nitty-gritty of the Greek. But his response to the Romans 10:9, to the fact that I took and I pointed out that the word for confess in the Greek actually was inherently tied to covenant. It wasn't merely just confessing by saying something, but it was confessing something in a covenant. It was making a covenant. And he said, that he thinks people can really complicate things. But yet I was doing the very same thing that he feels he was doing with regards to dissecting James chapter 1 verse 5, if any of you lack wisdom. And he was trying to differentiate, wisdom, Sophia, and it's different from the gnosis. And it's kind of funny too, because this is another tangent, but the moment he says gnosis, he really jumps on it, and he talks about how the gnosis is it was a cult and a heresy which the Christians rejected. If anybody really actually gets in and studies Gnosticism and those groups that were considered Gnostic, and the label of Gnostic, they will find it's actually quite a blurry subject, because it seems a common habit of virtually all Christian sects, before the creeds, of course, and actually the creeds kind of silence this, but that was kind of the common soup du jour, soup of the day, if you will, accusation against their enemies was, we're the true church, all these phony Gnostics. Another interesting thing that I think is not realized or considered often is, where did Gnosticism come from? It's this big phenomena that hits the early Christian church. What are its roots? Why did it all of a sudden pop out, and why was it so big? Because I don't think a lot of people realize that. But if you look at it, things such as, for example, Jesus Christ, as our evangelical brethren will say, completed his work. His work was done, and they'll often use that as an excuse for, we don't need any more prophets today, because Christ finished everything, and he just completed everything there. Well, the interesting thing is if Christ completed all his work on the cross and with his resurrection, why did he come back for 40 days and teach? What did he teach, and why is it not found in the scriptures? You think, if it was repeating what he said before, it would mention that somewhere in the canon that's accepted by Christians, but it's completely silent. So Christ, after resurrecting, the proof that Christianity is true, Christ returning, and he stays with the people for 40 days, and there's nothing in there on what he said to people. But yet Gnosticism, if you'll actually study it, is people claiming to have a secret knowledge, and this seemed to have been common belief, and it was a common belief held by Christians, which is why the movement had so much traction and why there were so many little tiny sects that sprouted up and claimed to have the gnosis. Because clearly, I mean, if you're reading in the New Testament, the gnosis stands out. You need the gnosis. And there's this whole concept of the gnosis having been given to Christ's disciples while he was here during that 40 days, but it's not written anywhere in the New Testament. And so all these little groups would come out and say, I have the gnosis, I know what Christ taught during those 40 days. And the reason why it had traction was because everybody knew that there was something that was taught during those 40 days, and they didn't have it. Now, I'm not saying all these Gnostic sects were correct. In fact, they weren't. But where they came from, the concept that from which they were birthed is never addressed, because anybody who actually studies the history but still wishes to cling to creedal Christian dogma or some other thing, they have no incentive to bring up why Gnosticism was emergent and why it had such success. Why these people just head over heels jumped at these people, anybody that would claim to have the gnosis. So, moving on. Now there's been kind of an interesting dwelling on something that's been going on in this correspondence and between Shazoolo and Ever Surprise and Jericho regarding prayer. And Shazoolo's contention is, well, we're not supposed to because God tells us not to. And he brings up in his first contention of this, when asked about how do Christians know what the Bible is, that the Bible is true, and he mentions that he doesn't really know of Christians that have prayed and asked about the Bible. But it's interesting because he won't say that that's not a right thing to do, that you can't do that, or that it won't work for the Bible. And so in addressing this, there are just some really interesting things, okay? First of all, I would agree with him that people can recognize things to be true without praying about them. But this opens up a whole bunch of things to consider, because I have the same witness of the Book of Mormon. I had a witness that it was true previous to praying about it. Now, that's kind of interesting. So, if we take the thing that Christians recognize it right away, how do they recognize it, Shazoolo? You mentioned how people can be deceived by praying about the Book of Mormon to know if it's true, and that the responses they'll get can deceive them. How do you know that what you felt when you read the Bible, how do you know that was of God? How do you know that was of the true God and not of some person trying to deceive you? Note, in the New Testament, it says, try all the spirits. Now this ties directly into the claim, the constant claim, and it's harped again and again on your side, is the constant reference, if anybody should preach another gospel, even if it's an angel of heaven, and they'll point to Moroni and say, haha, they're listening to an angel, and it's another gospel from what we have, so they're wrong. Well, I would ask you, how do you know that the gospel you have received is the same gospel that is referenced when they're talking about that? Because they didn't have the New Testament when that was said. When it was said, if anybody preaches another gospel, even if it comes from an angel, how do you know that you have that gospel that was spoken of? And again, if you say it's just something that you feel that's just emergent from reading the Bible, it just comes out there, how do you know that feeling is correct? And if you're